Obsidian can be incredibly helpful for making new connections, a major perk compared to the physical Zettelkasten system. The main benefit is that you're standardizing a system of building blocks, like Lego, where you can reuse your notes in an infinite number of ways. You don't have to think about the organization or structure, which frees up your mind to focus on the ideas and learning. The goal of Zettelkasten is to keep track of where information came from and your own ideas so you can build on external information with your internal ideas. I've personally used a modified version of Zettelkasten to publish over 150,000 words in the last year alone, or approximately 3 nonfiction books worth. It's been the best way by far that I've ever found to manage my knowledge. Hello, my name is Callum, also known as Wanderloots, and welcome to today's video on Zettelkasten and knowledge management theory, an overview of my molecular Zettelkasten note-taking system in Obsidian. Modern tools enable us to keep track of information and knowledge better than ever before, which is very much needed in the information overload society that we live in. To use these modern tools to their full potential, it helps to take a look at how we can update successful physical systems to the modern digital world. We can customize a digital system so that it is unique to each of us, so that we can learn and keep track of knowledge in the most natural way possible, a personal knowledge management system. One of the best known systems of knowledge management is the Zettelkasten system, developed by Niklas Luhmann, one of the most prolific writers of all time, publishing more than 70 books and 400 academic papers. Niklas Luhmann credits his publishing success solely to one invention, the Zettelkasten. Zettelkasten is a structured note-taking system where you can keep your external information separate from your internal knowledge. The word Zettelkasten comes from Zettel, or slip, and Kasten, box, in German. A slip is like an index card, a small, structured piece of information that you can use to store your notes on. And Kasten, the box, is a way to keep those index cards organized so that you can find them easily in the future to make connections between them to build out your ideas. This framework produces an external scaffolding for your mind, a second brain, so you can focus more on the ideas and following insights and intuition rather than trying to think of where should I put my note and how can I find it again. It really adds a lot of potential to knowledge management because you really don't have to think about the structure since you've preset the structure up front. Today, I'm going to map Luhmann's physical Zettelkasten system to my molecular Zettelkasten system in the digital ecosystem of Obsidian. I'm going to try and do this as simply as possible, as I know that Zettelkasten can be kind of a confusing concept and a lot of people tend to overcomplicate it. I'm going to do this by focusing on 3 main elements: read, or watch, consume information; think, take notes and work with your notes; and write, publish information based on the knowledge that you're keeping track inside of your Zettelkasten system in Obsidian. We consume more information in one day than a person in the 1500s did in their entire lifetime. Understanding how to work with your knowledge and work with information is more important than ever, and that's what I'm aiming to do with today's video. Here's today's outline. What is Zettelkasten note-taking? An overview of how Niklas Luhmann built his physical system, and then extracting the key insights so we can introduce them into a digital system. The goals of Zettelkasten and knowledge management. Why you should care about Zettelkasten, the benefits of using a note-taking system like this. A Zettelkasten workflow in Obsidian Canvas. Mapping Zettelkasten to my system, which I call molecular Zettelkasten. Mapping both Zettelkasten and my molecular note-taking to the CODE method from building a second brain. Capture, organize, distill, express. Outlining the goals of effective personal knowledge management so that you have a direction to use your notes, simplifying the creation process. Theory and mental models of personal knowledge management. The knowledge feedback loop, how you can consume data and information, forge it into knowledge, and then share it with other people as information again. Cal's 8 laws of note-taking, what I try to keep in mind as I'm taking notes to simplify my system. To help reduce the feeling of information overload, I'm splitting this video into 2 parts. This one is going to deal more with the theory and understanding of Zettelkasten, how it works, and why you care about a system like this in the first place. And in the second part, I'm going to walk through more practical examples and a templating system on how I actually use my molecular Zettelkasten system. Okay, let's take a look at what Zettelkasten is. To simplify Zettelkasten as much as possible, it's easier to think about it as 2 different systems. We have an external management system and an internal management system. The external system helps you keep track of sources and information from outside of yourself, and the internal system is more of an idea generation box, something that's based solely on your own ideas and insights. The goal of Zettelkasten is to keep track of where information came from and your own ideas so you can build on external information with your internal ideas. Originally, Niklas Luhmann had two physical slip boxes. He had one as a reference manager slip box and one as an idea generated slip box, or a thinking slip box. These two systems made it a lot easier in the physical world to keep track of where information came from than a digital system where we can just copy and paste all of the time. So I'm going to modify this in a digital system so that it becomes easier to keep track of what is external and what is internal. In the physical system, Niklas Luhmann needed a way to keep track of index cards, the Zettels in his Zettelkasten. So he used a reference manager system where he could file index cards one after another and then use a separate reference system to identify where the information was coming from. That way, he could always look at his main slip box, the idea generating slip box, and he could find the specific reference back in the reference manager system. This is something we don't have to worry about in a digital system because Obsidian takes care of all of that, which I'll get into in a little bit. Now, the original Zettelkasten system had three main note types. The first were fleeting notes. These are quick notes. Think jotting it down on a post-it note. Then there are literature note, which is key information from sources. As you read a book, you extract the ideas and the concepts and put it in your own word as a literature note. This is part of the reference manager system. And then the third type of note is the Zettel, which is a permanent note. And that is the type of note that goes inside of the main slip box or your own idea generation slip box. These are key insights that have been crystallized in your own words, also known as knowledge. Now let's look at each of these note types in more depth. Fleeting notes are quick notes. These are thoughts that you have while on a walk or while having a conversation with someone. You've had some experience, it sparks an idea, and you want to quickly jot it down. And you're not concerned about the format at all. Fleeting notes are meant to be destroyed in the sense that you convert them into literature notes or permanent notes, Zettels, which is why they are fleeting. They don't form part of the permanent system of literature notes or permanent notes. Literature notes are atomic notes. Each note is meant to have one single concept. You've extracted a quote and written it in your own words. This could come from a podcast, a book, a video, a conversation. The idea is that you take the information that you just consumed and you distill it into a form that will remind you of that note in the future, that will remind you of that key idea or key concept of the information that you consumed. And these are always linked back to the original source, which is why they're called literature notes. I personally think of them more as source notes. Literature notes are understandable in the context of the source so that you can go back later and know exactly where the information came from. This is why they form part of the reference manager slipbox in the Zettelkasten system. And the third type of note is the permanent note. These are crystallized insights or knowledge that come from taking the concepts that you've reviewed inside of the literature notes and your fleeting notes, and you combine them together to form a permanent piece of knowledge inside of your main slipbox, inside of your idea-generated slipbox. This could have one or more concepts, but typically you want to keep them as short as possible because the point of using permanent notes is that we'll be able to sequence them in the future to produce other types of content. You can kind of think of them like building blocks or Lego blocks. Permanent notes are understandable out of context, but they're linked to the original sources via literature notes. For example, have you ever gone back to a note that you wrote 6 months ago and you have no idea what it was you were writing it for or where the idea came from? Permanent notes try to solve this problem by decontextualizing the information so that it is understandable in and of itself without needing to go read something else. And if you want to recontextualize it, if you want to go back and find out where the information was inspired from, where the knowledge occurred, you can go take a look at the reference manager slipbox as the literature note system. The most simplified version of Zettelkasten, the easiest way that I've found to understand it, is to keep in mind that there are always two systems. We have an external slipbox for information from sources, and we have an internal slipbox, which is a conversion of those external sources mixed with our own ideas so that we always know which was our idea and which came from someone else. You can think of the external slipbox as the thoughts of others, information that you're consuming from external sources. These are converted into literature notes, which are kind of like the permanent source notes for information extractions from the sources. You then have some kind of reference manager for citations to keep track of the literature notes and the sources and link them together. A digital system also enables fleeting notes to be put in sources because we're dealing with the abundant world of the digital realm, but I'll get into more of that later. And then we have a second slip box for internal thinking, thoughts of my own, a thinking box, or an idea generator box. This box stores our permanent notes, which I call molecules, or think of as linked concepts. This box stores thoughts, ideas, and crystallizations of insights that apply to your own projects, problem, or life. You can think of it as keeping track of your actual knowledge and ideas. Now, this system might seem like overkill, and to be honest, I thought so at first too. But the more I looked into this, the more I recognized that we consume more information than ever. And by having a system that allows us to keep track of what is external and what is internal, we can then take the time to focus on the internal, to review our own thoughts and ideas, which really boosts originality and ingenuity and allows us to find and build on our own ideas. Using an external mind, a second brain, or a digital brain helps us deal with information overload as part of our personal knowledge management system. We can filter and process information from others, convert it into our own knowledge so that we're not feeling overwhelmed, and then share the value of that knowledge with other people. The Zettelkasten system allows us to keep track of the information that we're getting from external sources and how we've modified it inside of our second brain to produce knowledge that's applicable to our own lives. Zettelkasten also helps us measure productivity by tracking the number of permanent notes created, an indication of truly understanding concepts. Rather than looking at my entire note base or the entire internet when looking for new information, I can instead constrain my search to my existing knowledge system. This greatly simplifies my review of information that I've consumed and processed in the past and reduces information overload. It's not possible to be overloaded by knowledge, we just get overloaded by information. Here's a quote from the book, How to Take Smart Notes. Most organizational note-taking decisions can be made upfront, once and for all, by deciding on one system. So, let's create that system. Let's structure a system so that we never have to think about where the notes are going or how we're going to organize it. We can take all of that energy that went into deciding on the organization system, or perhaps triggered organizational paralysis, analysis paralysis, and instead use that energy and time to build up our own ideas based on a secure knowledge system. I want to note that in the second part of this video, I'm going to be walking through my templating system in Obsidian, how I converted Zettelkasten into what I call molecular Zettelkasten, and the templates and inboxes for this system. I'm going to produce a zip file of this vault as a starter kit for molecular Zettelkasten, and that will be available to the paying members of my YouTube membership at the lowest tier, which is currently $2.99 Canadian, around $2 US. So if you find this information valuable and you want to support me for the hundreds of hours that I've put into building this system, I would really appreciate if you would consider joining the community. It's also a great place to talk about this with other people so that we can each build and customize the system ourselves. Okay, now let's take a look at Zettelkasten more in depth. I want to talk a bit about the main benefits of Zettelkasten. The more you understand why this system is valuable and how it applies to your own life, the more you align it with your own goals, the more practical and less abstract this system becomes. Here are some of the key principles of using my molecular Zettelkasten system, which is the digitized version of Zettelkasten along with a few of my own note types. The Zettelkasten system allows you to leverage the generation effect when you take information and you convert it into your own words. The process of translating this into your own words helps you remember it and makes it more applicable in the future. Using a Zettelkasten system allows you to offload your working memory. You don't have to remember everything, you can instead store it inside of your second brain, which drastically reduces your information overload because instead of focusing on the working memory trying to keep everything in mind, you can instead focus more on the insights and the ideas themselves. The molecular Zettelkasten system in Obsidian allows for an emergent growth opportunity. There's exponential growth 2 to the nth power. Each connection you make between a different node allows for more connections to other nodes, and over time you end up building a critical mass of nodes that can lead to whatever it is you're trying to do. You can think of this kind of like bamboo. For the first 3 years, all you have to do with bamboo is water it. It doesn't really come above the ground. But then in the 4th year, all of a sudden it explodes and it generates up to 90 feet or 30 meters within 2 months. A Zettelkasten system, and my molecular Zettelkasten system, is kind of like this bamboo. At first, you're just adding more and more nodes. You're building out your literature notes, and then you're building out your permanent node inbox. But over time, eventually you'll make enough connections that something will become very emergent. It will appear, and you'll be shocked that you never did this in the first place. I actually attended a lecture series as part of the Hinton Lectures by Geoffrey Hinton, the godfather of AI, where he talked about the emergent property of data. For a long time, for literally billions of parameters, it seems as though nothing has happened. All of a sudden, you hit a billion parameters, and it goes vertical. There's an emergent property. The Zettelkasten system is kind of like this, especially when applied in Obsidian. The Zettelkasten system also allows for original insight synthesis. I'll map this to Bloom's taxonomy later, which structures a system for original thinking. Using Obsidian in particular allows you to literally map your knowledge, insights, and wisdom. The graph view, the visualization in Obsidian, can be incredibly helpful for making new connections and is a major perk compared to the physical Zettelkasten system. And finally, the main benefit is that you're standardizing a system of building blocks, like Lego, where you can reuse your notes in an infinite number of ways. You don't have to think about the organization or structure, which frees up your mind to focus on the ideas and learning. The more critical mass you begin generating inside of your permanent note slip box, the more note sequences you can make in different combinations, which helps you generate a lot of new and interesting ideas. All of what I'm talking about so far fits under the category of PKM, or Personal Knowledge Management. Now that I've explained a little bit more about the Zettelkasten system with a touch of Obsidian, let's give a brief overview on my molecular note system that I use inside of Obsidian. My system modifies the original Zettelkasten system to take into account the CODE method of note-taking by Tiago Forte in Building a Second Brain. Stands for Capture, Organize, Distill, and Express. This takes the original Zettelkasten system and modifies it for the digital world in a way that really allows you to take advantage of tools like Obsidian and Notebook LM, systems that you can truly begin to augment your personal knowledge management. Rather than dealing with an atomic note-taking system like Zettelkasten, I've modified mine to be molecular to level up the existing system to take into account a few different note types. Let's take a look. Similar to Zettelkasten, we have the capture component, which is fleeting notes. And in my system, these are source notes, daily notes, and new notes. Then we move on to the organize component of code. Organization notes like topics and tags. In the original Zettelkasten system, he didn't use topics or tags because he was writing on index cards and it would be difficult to go through and structure new folder systems. In Obsidian, this is completely moot and opens the door to a lot better organization. Distill. My distilled notes are atoms, which are literature notes, and molecules, which are permanent notes. This is very similar to the original Zettelkasten system. Finally, we get to the express part of code. Publishable notes, which I call alloys because I have a material science background, and when you get a bunch of atoms and molecules and combine them, you can build alloys in metallurgy. Effectively, what I'm doing is I'm using the code method from Building a Second Brain and the Zettelkasten method to structure three different boxes. We have the in box, the consuming box, where we read and watch videos and consume podcasts. We have the thinking section, which is the slip box, where we take notes and modify them. And then we have the outbox, which is the publishing component. I use my topics and tags in a way that allows me to structure for emergence inside of my Obsidian, which leads to untold value and unpredictable value. I talk more about the tags versus topics system that I use to structure my molecular note-taking in another video, so I recommend checking that out if you're interested in how to modify your system for emergence. Okay, now let's actually take a look at the Zettelkasten system itself, where I'm going to map this in the Canvas tool in Obsidian, and then I'm going to convert it into my molecular note system before touching more on personal knowledge management theory that I hope will help make this system feel a lot more concrete and less abstract. Let's dive in. Okay, so here's where I left off after my beginner Obsidian tutorial. So I thought this would be a good vault to work on to show you the benefits of a Zettelkasten system and how I apply that Zettelkasten system to my own system called molecular notes. I first came across the concept of molecular notes from reasonabledeviations.com. Robert Martin took some of the concepts from Zettelkasten and applied his own system to it. So I've taken Robert's system of molecular notes and added my own thoughts to it, where I've expanded to include an additional category and bring in some more concepts from Zettelkasten. So before we get started, I just thought that it would make sense to change the default theme to Atom, because this is my preferred theme. And since we're going to be working with atomic note-taking, I thought that seemed fitting. Okay, and I'm also going to try something a little different here. I'm going to create a new canvas, and I'm going to use the canvas to walk through the various features of Zettelkasten and my own molecular note system so that you have a bit of a map of what's going on with this system. You can see a bit of a workflow here, and hopefully that will help you visualize how all of the pieces of this system come together. So what I've done here is I've taken some of my favorite concepts on knowledge management and I've applied it to the CODE method, which I talked about last time. So I can drag a note in here. You can see that CODE has 4 different elements to it. It has capture, organize, distill, and express. Before we get too deep into this, I thought it would be helpful to explain the Zettelkasten primitives. Next, I will map Zettelkasten to molecular notes, which is my system for operating. And then I'll create templates for each of the note primitives. Okay, so now if we take a look at my notes here, I've expanded on the CODE method, capture, organize, distill, and express, and I've included the different note types from the Zettelkasten system that I just explained, and I've mapped the Zettelkasten system to my own molecular note system. So you can see here that there's a few different note types. Each of these note types are indicated by a tag, a hashtag. I'll get more into tags when I get into the actual creation of templates as a part of this molecular system, but I do have a separate video that goes deep into the comparison of tags versus topic notes and how I use each of those. So if you're confused at all about topics or tags as we go through this, I recommend checking out that video. In the Zettelkasten system, if you recall, there's 2 different slip boxes. There's the reference slip box, and then there is the main slip box. The reference slip box is made up of bibliographic notes, which come from sources, and also literature notes that are tied to a citation that you got from the source, but are an extraction. So this is what I'm going to call an atom, because it's a singular atomic concept that I've pulled out of a source note. Now, source notes are a type of fleeting note because I just jot down whatever thoughts come to mind as I'm reading the source, and then I go through and extract the insights and the ideas I had into my permanent slip box, which is my main slip box, and also into atoms. So I use the source as kind of the raw material that I then mine atoms or extract atoms, and also extract the ideas and thoughts and combine them with atoms to create molecules. This provides a really simple way for me to keep track of where I got ideas from, the direct source, because it's tied to the reference system, but also a way that I can keep track of my own ideas as I go through and create that source. So then there's also a daily note, which is another type of fleeting note. And basically, that's just a way where I can go and click a button on the side and it will create a new note for me. So this is like a dumping ground where I'll drop thoughts, ideas, concepts, things I want to look into, questions, any thought that comes to my mind. Any fleeting thought I'll add here as a fleeting note. Both daily notes and source notes are considered part of the capture system. Organization is done through topics and tags, which again I talk about more in another video. And then I go through and distill those captured notes, those fleeting notes, into atoms and molecules. So both atoms and molecules can be considered a type of permanent note in the sense that I've distilled their essence down to the core concept so that I can use it as a building block elsewhere. And then finally, we get to the express section, which is what I call an alloy, because alloys are made up of multiple molecules. And these are everything that gets published. It's part of what I build in public. So this could go into my digital garden, this could go into my newsletter, into my YouTube videos, and eventually, because I'm keeping track of all the citations, I can also use it to print academic papers or write a book while keeping track of my sources. If you would like to consider this more in the digital garden analogy, you can think of the source node or the daily note, the fleeting note, as a place where I have idea seeds. And over time, I cultivate those seeds into atoms and molecules so that they become trees, which are a more refined version of the fleeting node, an expansion on the seed. As I cultivate those trees, over time, they begin to bear fruit, which are the alloys that I then share in public. Again, I know that this is a lot of information, so I'm going to break through it step by step so that each piece becomes a lot clearer. Here are the basic Zettelkasten primitives that I just talked about. We have fleeting notes, literature notes, permanent notes, and then bibliographic notes. And if you remember, there are 2 different slip boxes that we're dealing with. We're dealing with a reference manager slip box, and we're dealing with an idea generator slip box, or the main slip box. So let's just sort these different primitives. Fleeting notes fit under the reference manager slip box because they're notes that we take as we read sources. So as you're reading a book, perhaps you write down quotes, you write down key insights that you've pulled out of the source material. You've watched a YouTube video and a quote jumps out at you or a thought jumps out at you, and you quickly jot that down under a fleeting note. And as a part of that fleeting note, you keep track of where it came from using a bibliographic note, like a citation. So this could be the name of the book, the author of the book, and it is an easy way for you to go back and tie this to your fleeting note so you know where that quote came from. Then you go through and you extract literature notes, which are key insights, atomic notes, key ideas, singular concepts. So in a sense, we have both fleeting notes and bibliographic notes, and they go together. Then Afterwards, you go back and you review your fleeting notes in your bibliographic notes, and you extract key insights one by one into their own independent notes, into a literature note, a note that came from literature or from a video or any other source of information that you want to be able to reference the specific place that you got it from, but you don't want to go back and reread all of your fleeting notes. You want to distill and condense it into your atomic notes, into your literature notes. Then we get to the idea generator slip box, and this is where you take the literature notes and you review them and you add them into your permanent note selection. So this could involve linked concepts, ideas, thoughts, plus source material, which in this case are literature notes. To help keep these in mind and to use this as a way to map to my molecular note system, I'm going to color code them. And then the whole point of using this type of note-taking system is that we have a goal of publication. We're writing for print. So we want to take the key insights, the distillations that we've added into our idea generator slip box, and we want to take that and express it in some form of publication. As we come across new sources, we take fleeting notes and track where we got the notes from. We go back and review those notes and extract key ideas, singular concepts in atomic notes or literature notes. And then we go back and review those atomic notes and link them together and add our own thoughts and ideas to create a permanent note, something that we are writing in a format that is designed for expression, designed to be shared, so that we can combine multiple permanent notes in a note sequence and then publish it for print. That's a quick overview of the Zettelkasten system. If we quickly compare that to code, we have a capture system with fleeting notes where we jot down new information, ideas, and information that we get from source material. We organize it by putting it into a system that keeps track of the information with bibliographic notes. And then we distill the key elements into literature notes and then express them into permanent notes, which form the basis for true expression, the public expression, which is print. Now let's apply this to my system, which has a couple more primitives. I also have fleeting notes as part of my system. I have source notes, I have topic notes, project notes, atoms, which are literature notes, and molecules, which are permanent notes. And finally, I have alloys, which are publishable notes. In my system as well, I have two different organization methods. I use these two different slipbox styles from the Zettelkasten system. I just adapt it to be a little more practical for a digital ecosystem, since again, Zettelkasten was designed for physical. So I'm going to keep the red color to match the reference manager. And for myself, rather than just having a single box where I store all of my permanent notes without an indication on how they relate to other notes by topic, I use specific topic notes to keep better track of this. So I'll make that orange. And I also use project notes as a place to keep track of my goals, because one of the best ways to use a writing system like this is to have an idea or a question or a goal in mind and then use your existing reference manager system to identify key insights that can be applied to the project. And by tying specific concepts to your project, you can produce permanent notes because you're making it real and applicable for you specifically. For myself, a fleeting note can be a source note, but it can also be a daily note. So let's add that in here. My fleeting notes come in two different categories, and both of these are capture methods, the C in code. Then after going through my fleeting notes, I extract the key insights into atoms, which are the equivalent of literature notes in the Zettelkasten system. And I apply topics to my atomic notes, to my atom notes. Then I go through and I pull out the key insights that I've derived in the atoms. Then, inside of my source notes, I also include fleeting notes. So, for example, if I'm writing down a quote, I might take a note alongside that quote. So, in that case, it's not necessarily a fleeting note as it relates specifically to an atomic note as part of the reference manager system, but it's actually a thought or idea. So sometimes my fleeting notes actually directly go into my molecular notes as well. I'll show you in a little bit how I actually structure this inside of my source notes when we get into the templating section, and it'll make a little more sense there. Once we go through and we've built up an idea generation slip box in the molecules, I go through and I combine them and I publish them. So these published notes could be a newsletter, could be a YouTube video, could be my digital garden. And again, I'll get into that in a little bit. So you can see how this system is actually quite similar, but I've just included a couple sub notes like these daily notes and source notes and project notes that produce fleeting notes that then can be used as both inspiration for the atoms, the literature notes that I'm pulling out of my sources, and the molecular notes, the permanent notes of my key ideas and how they actually apply to the literature notes that I'm extracting from the sources. To help you see this a little bit better, let's go back to that graphic I showed you at the beginning of code and how this all ties together, and then I'll get into the templates that I use for each of these node types to help speed up my system. Okay, so now I hope that you've seen a little bit better how these different concepts fit into the buckets of capture, organize, distill, and express. So we have daily notes and source notes, which are a form of fleeting notes, and also the source notes tie to a bibliographic reference, a citation. We use topics for structure. Again, I'll get into that later. And then we have a distillation component where we distill the source material into atoms and then use that distillation to apply our own ideas and thoughts plus the atom to create a molecule, to create a combination of multiple concepts together that form a permanent part of my collection of my main slip box, my idea generation slip box. Then I use these molecules, which are tied back to the citation to the credibility of the atoms, and I can write and express these ideas or create YouTube videos for them. So to show a quick workflow, I could read my book, I can take notes on my books and extract quotes. I can tag those quotes with a particular topic that helps me understand structure. And then I can distill the literature notes as atoms and as molecules from a combination of these fleeting notes and atomic notes, and use those based on my projects and my questions and my ideas, the things that I'm pursuing with this research, to produce something in a publishable format. Okay, so now that you've seen a little bit more about Zettelkasten, you might feel a bit confused. I know I did when I first started researching this. I found that it was very helpful to actually take a step back and look at the goals of why I was trying to build a system like Zettelkasten and why it appealed to me in the first place. By looking at these goals and listing them out, I was then able to map what it was I was trying to do in a practical way in my Obsidian so that my note taking system really took off and became a lot more valuable for me. So here are some of the common goals that I keep in mind when structuring my note taking system. One of the things I've realized is that each person has different goals in mind. They have different things that they want to achieve with their note taking system. So that makes it really hard to come up with a one size fits all solution. So if you can keep in mind your specific goals as you go through and as you watch me create this note taking system, this molecular Zettelkasten, it'll help you have an emotional connection to this system because you'll be able to see how it can actually practically be used in your own life. And if you can see how it can be used in your own life as a practical purpose, all of a sudden the system starts to make a lot more sense. It's hard to deal with in the abstract. It's something that you just have to understand by doing. So with that in mind, I want to share a quote. The quote is from Richard Feynman, and it's, "Notes aren't a record of my thinking process. They are my thinking process." The Zettelkasten system will start to make a lot more sense if you start to think inside the box. If you use this system as an actual thinking box, rather than going to the internet to go look for new information, I can instead go to my permanent notes, my molecules, and look through the information that I've already distilled. This is knowledge that I've already included inside of my system, and it becomes a lot easier to process it because I'm not going to get information overload, since it's not information at this point, it's actual knowledge. The next goal is to create a standardized system, the thinking box. You can think of this as Lego for your thoughts. If you have a standardized system, you have a system in place that you don't have to think about, that you just go and you know that you can fit all the different pieces together. You can truly have atomic notes that you can plug together in any different way to build whatever it is you want. By standardizing the system up front, you can save a ton of time in actually using your system because you don't have to think about where things go. You can actually just focus instead on your ideas and your understanding and looking for insights rather than, oh, where should I put this note? Where should I organize this? The next goal is to solve the blank page problem, which is another way of saying never start from scratch. Because once you've gone through and you've created your Lego blocks, you've created your atomic notes, you begin building up your molecular system of your permanent notes. You'll have hundreds or thousands of pieces that you can use and put together in any different combination that you want to. You can think of it as you have an idea, a new project comes to mind, and that's kind of like the instructions of a Lego kit. And you can use the same pieces in a Lego kit to build a castle or a house or a boat. You can build whatever it is you want and you can reuse the pieces. So rather than starting from scratch inside of your thinking box, you can go back and reuse your atoms and your molecules, your literature notes and your permanent notes, so that you can just piece together the ideas in new ways, and that will help you derive new insights and come up with new things to publish. And the next main goal is to generate intuitive and organic growth. So the idea here is that as you build up your box, as you build up your notes, you'll eventually start to have an intuition on how different things connect together, how you can use topics and how you can use atoms and sources and molecules to produce the alloys, to produce the fruit of your work. The key here is that this is something that's only going to work for you. Intuition is not something that you can tell someone else. It's something that you have to do yourself to develop a personal system. There's a reason that it's called personal knowledge management, because everyone is going to have a slightly different system that they use to generate this type of insight. So if you can follow your own intuition and make connections between notes, then you'll be able to generate a system that works uniquely for you. And finally, a main goal is to reduce working memory. By offloading all of your thoughts and ideas and knowledge, by introducing quotes and notes and linking everything together in a way that you can instantly go and find whatever it is you're looking for, you can significantly reduce your working memory as you go to create new things, as you work on original thinking or work to solve your problems intuitively. By offloading all of this into your second brain, into your molecular Zettelkasten system, you can take all of the energy that you normally would have taken trying to remember things and instead apply that to new creations and understanding. Once I understood my own goals better for note taking, to be honest, I was still a little confused at the value of Zettelkasten and how I could practically implement it. So I decided to do some research into personal knowledge management theory, or the study of knowledge, epistemology. By looking at some of the main theories of knowledge and how that fits into modern knowledge management, I was much better able to map the Zettelkasten system to what made sense for me in a practical sense as part of my molecular note taking system. Let's take a look at a few of the common theories that I've personally found to be the most valuable. I want to walk through a couple different graphics that I personally find very helpful that I hope will make these concepts a little more concrete and less abstract to show you how information can actually be converted into knowledge, and knowledge can be converted into wisdom, and then wisdom can be applied based on insights that you're deriving through the use of your thinking box, your Zettelkasten system. Let's take a look at one of my favorite graphics. This is called the data, information, knowledge, wisdom chart, or in this case, it goes a little bit deeper into insights and impact. But the idea here is that we start off with data. And data is something like the name of a book or an author. It's a note that we've created, but it doesn't have any information in it. It's just a blank note. This could be considered like a ghost note. For example, if I were to go to one of my existing notes, like the code note, and I wanted to create a new note called data, information, knowledge, wisdom, you can see here that there's a difference in the color. This emergent structure is a note that I have already written in, but this data, insight, knowledge, wisdom note is a ghost note. It's one that doesn't have any information in it. It's kind of like this data point where it's a blank note that doesn't have any color. And if we look here at the local graph, you can see here that the emergent structure note is filled in. It looks more like one of these information dots than the data, information, knowledge, wisdom note, which is just a grayed out note, a ghost note. So I think this is actually where Obsidian, when you start to compare the knowledge graph on how you can use Obsidian to this type of graph here, you can really start to understand the concrete nature of forging knowledge from information by making connections between dots. Now, if we go back to the graph here, once we've gone through our sources and we've pulled out quotes and we've added notes, we've effectively taken that empty data point and we've added information to it. We've filled it with something. When we go through and we extract information from the source into a literature note, which I'm calling an atom, we now have a piece of information that came from an external source. The more atoms you build in here, sure, they might be connected to a source, but they're not connected to each other because it's just a singular concept. The connection is where the ideas really start to shine, and that's where we start to get into knowledge. You can see here that the different information dots we have now are linked by lines, which is exactly like the knowledge graph in Obsidian. You can see here that we've got pieces of information, singular notes that have been connected to one another to form linkages. And again, this is how you introduce knowledge from information. If you take a single quote from a source, you turned it into some form of atom, and then you link multiple quotes together, now all of a sudden you're starting to get into knowledge because you're applying that information. That applied information, that connected information, is like taking the atoms and adding your own ideas or thoughts or insights, and you link them together. You bridge concepts together. This is what I call a molecule, or in Zettelkasten, this would be a permanent note. So once you've begun creating your idea generator slip box, your thinking box, you can then go back through and you can just take a look at the knowledge that you already have consumed. It's something that is a lot harder to feel overwhelmed with because it's knowledge, not information. So as you go through this knowledge, when you're looking through your slip box, your main slip box, you might begin to identify insights. And these are usually derived from your projects, where you might have a question or a problem that you're trying to solve. And this problem or this question can operate as a guide that can lead you towards insights, which are unexpected connections. It's where you take the context and you apply it to your knowledge, and you start to realize, like, oh, perhaps these two notes are actually related to each other. Let me see if I can make a connection. Let me see if I can follow the path to get from one note to another and then produce this insight between them. And that's what's called wisdom, because you're taking knowledge and you're actually applying it to your life. That's what wisdom is. It's when you take something that is applicable in one situation and you use that knowledge and apply it in another situation. And by doing so, the more you begin to develop wisdom, the greater impact you have. And this impact, it can be published, it can be something that's shared. So not only is this wisdom having an impact on your own life, but it's also having an impact on someone else's life. We can take these external data points, we can convert them into information, and then we can link that information together into our own internal system to create molecules or permanent notes, and then apply those molecules to our problems and our projects and our life to generate insights that can produce wisdom that help us publish information, publish that knowledge in a way that it's information for other people. So it ends up becoming a source, and we end up having this nice little circle. It's a great feedback loop. This is what's called a personal knowledge management system here. So I go and I try and derive information from sources. I make sense of it by processing it, distilling it into atoms and molecules, and then I share those ideas with my community. And that helps them seek and sense, and then we end up all building together in a very helpful way. This is also known as the continuum of understanding, where you gather parts, you collect concepts like the data points, the blank notes. You then add information to those notes, you add quotes, and you begin connecting them to form wholes, which are knowledge, and then you join those wholes together to form wisdom. So you look to the past, what other people have done to produce data and information, and then you take that information and convert it and process it into knowledge yourself so that you can apply it in the future. As another form of that graphic, you can see here that we can take data, we can process that data into information by asking questions and organizing it to describe who, what, where, and when. Then we can take that information and we can apply theory to it, which is a framework that we're getting from someone else, from a book, for example. And then as we go through and we actually experience that theory ourselves, we can combine our own experience with that theory to produce knowledge, which is the collective information that is actually relevant to our lives. As we go through and look at that knowledge, we can process it and we can begin to generate other understanding. We can derive insights on how it's actually applicable to our own lives. And then we can use that applicable knowledge to produce wisdom, which is where we actually try to apply that knowledge to the future so that we can do what works best for us. You can see here it's also split again into extrinsic and intrinsic. So the data and the information comes from external sources, but the knowledge and understanding is from an internal source. And then we apply that through wisdom, which becomes an extrinsic source for someone else. And then the final framework that I wanted to talk about here is called Bloom's taxonomy. So this is a very well-known method of getting to original thinking, to true creation. So you start at the bottom where you need to remember information. You recall basic facts and concepts. So you can think of this like the atoms. Then you take those atoms and you use your own words to explain them. This is where you take that information and you convert it into knowledge. You begin to understand what the concepts are because they actually have an applicability to your own life. You can then apply that knowledge, that understanding, in new situations, which is like wisdom, because you're taking that knowledge and making it more practical. The more knowledge you apply and the more knowledge you accumulate inside of your thinking box, the more you're able to draw connections between new ideas, and you're able to analyze how that old knowledge applies to these new situations. You begin to evaluate the impact of those connections and how this is changing your life. And overall, you end up having an entirely new experience, something that's fairly unique to you, where you're able to go through and distill all of that remembering, understanding, application, analysis, and evaluation to truly produce some new or original work. As you can see with Bloom's taxonomy, the point is to elevate each type of thinking until we get to the apex, to the top of the pyramid, which is originality. The whole goal of using personal knowledge management is to help us make sense of our own ideas and how it maps to the rest of the world. As we consume information, we want to be able to filter and process it in a way that it actually has practical value for us. I worked as a patent agent and an intellectual property lawyer for many years. The whole point of what I was doing with my job was I would talk to inventors and engineers and scientists, and I would have teams of people discussing their ideas. I would work with them to help distill the key elements, the core concepts of their idea, the idea core. And then we would use that idea core to structure out the rest of the patent. The more you can do this in your own life, the easier it becomes to actually build on your existing insights and compound your knowledge because you have it within the purpose of trying to structure your system for original thinking. Also, I recognize that this is a lot of information, but what I'm trying to do is show you a few different theories because I never know what might resonate with one person or another. Hopefully, by looking at this concept of knowledge management from different perspectives, one framework will resonate with you and help the Zettelkasten system click. Now that you've seen the frameworks, let's go back to the molecular Zettelkasten system in a simplified format. So you can see here, I've separated this into an external box and an internal box. So the external box is the reference manager, and this is where we take sources, and we have these sources are experiences that we've had, like reading a book, watching a movie, listening to a podcast, and we can reference specific quotes from that source with a particular citation. And I use a specific citation manager called Zotero, but I'll get into that in another video. Then we go through and we distill the information from those sources into atoms, into permanent notes. Then on the internal side, as we have ideas, we can add those to fleeting notes. As we have thoughts, we can begin to accumulate potential connections between atoms. As we go through and reread the atoms in our specific folder that contains all of the atoms, the external slipbox, we can piece them together with new ideas and insights to produce permanent notes in our own words. This would be a molecule. Now let's apply personal knowledge management, that hourglass shape that we saw above, to the Zettelkasten system so that we have a flow here. This is my molecular workflow. I go and I seek new experiences, new information. This comes to me in the form of data. It could be the source name, the author, the topic, and it's some external source that I am capturing. As I consume that data, I capture what resonates. I write down quotes and I write down concepts and ideas that are derived from that particular source. I seek that information and I capture what resonates in the form of information. Now, this is a contextual experience because that information, those quotes, are still tied to the specific source themselves. This is all an external system. Then what I do is I decontextualize. I extract the atoms from their context and apply it to my own life. This is an internal application that makes connections between atoms in a way that it removes it from the context. It decontextualizes. This is where I apply that information to my own life and make connections based on relevance and thoughts and ideas based on the projects and questions that I have. Then I go back through and I try to make sense of those notes. I try to go through my molecules, through my knowledge box, and identify new insights. So this could be where I'm reading through a note on digital gardening and I have an idea on how digital gardening can apply to the Zettelkasten system. So I have a new insight. I feel called by some form of intuition because I've gone back through and read my own words that relate to a problem that I'm having, towards a goal or a purpose that I have in a project. I can take that insight and I can apply it to the knowledge and I can write a path for future me to follow. I'm producing what's called a wisdom bridge so that when I come back to that concept in the future, I know exactly how to walk that path again because I've already distilled the essence down to its purest form in a way that's going to be the most applicable to me. Then I can take those insights and knowledge, that wisdom, and I can recontextualize it. I can add back the information, the reference to the particular sources where I got it from, because I'm keeping track of my citations here, and I can share that wisdom and knowledge as information to other people. So it forms an external source of information and data for someone else. This is where I have three different methods of doing this. I have cultivating, publishing, and printing. Cultivating is taking my notes, and even if they're only 20% or 50% ready to be published, I publish them anyway into my digital garden. I have a whole video on digital gardening and how you can convert your Obsidian vault into a digital garden for free as a publication system. So if you're interested, I recommend checking that out. Or I can publish it in a more refined format. I can take it and I can add it as a newsletter or as this YouTube video. That would be a published format. And finally, if I wanted to, I could get into academic writing where I'm actually printing something where I need to have all of the citations organized because I need to have the output be highly credible for it to be accepted as either an academic paper or a book. As I publish this information, I can generate data on what other people find impactful, and I can use that as a form of information that helps me decide what to produce next time. So we get this really nice feedback loop of the flow of knowledge. Okay, So now that we've gone through more of the frameworks and you've seen how the flow of knowledge works in my Zettelkasten system, I thought I would apply a couple laws here. I just want you to keep this in mind as we go through and create the templates for each of the different notes, because it's really easy to get overwhelmed with all of this. So sometimes it's helpful to have a few rules, a few laws that you like to apply that you can default back to if you're starting to feel overwhelmed. The first law is that we value connecting over collecting. When you connect notes together, you begin to have nonlinear growth. You can have emergent properties and patterns come into existence by virtue of connecting your knowledge together, by connecting an atom to an idea to form a molecule, or multiple atoms together to form a molecule. This is in contrast to just writing down a quote, which is how most people take notes. This is traditional note taking where you just write down quotes, and it can be really difficult to derive a lot of value from that because it's been removed from its context and you tend to just read it in a linear format. By making connections between notes, we're introducing a non-linear pattern here, and that has a lot more potential to have exponential value. Another law is that projects guide your insights. So projects could be questions that you're trying to solve, problems you're trying to solve, just things that you're trying to get more information on, research into, so that you can have a direct application to your own life. If you're just writing down notes, if you're just collecting quotes, but you're not actually trying to keep track of your insights on how those quotes can apply to your life, then this whole system is far less effective. It's really hard to put into words how effective it can become if you use projects to guide your insights. Another law is that less is more. We don't want to have a ton of information here. We have enough information with the internet. The goal is to try and reduce and distill the information to its core so that it can be far more applicable. And related to the connecting over collecting, we have create over copy. You want to write your own words when you're writing down notes. You don't want to just copy something verbatim. This is called the generation effect, where by writing in your own words, by converting a quote into something that actually has meaning to you, you're far more likely to remember that information as knowledge. If you just copy it down, it's likely to just flit out of your head. Related to less is more, simplify. You always want to keep distilling. If the system feels too complicated for you to the point that you're not actually going to use it, that means that it's too complex and that you need to simplify it. The goal here is to make it practical for you. The next law is that we want to build in public. This relates to my commentary on digital garden and cultivating. So if you're interested in learning more about that, again, I recommend checking out my digital garden video. But the idea here is that rather than striving for perfectionism, we can instead share information as knowledge for other people and help guide them to make their own connections, even if it's not at a point that we would typically think of it being ready for publication. There's a lot of value in helping people along the way because they might only be a step or two behind you, rather than trying to spend months to draft an article that's in its perfect format. And related to simplification, we want to recalibrate for insights. What I mean by that is as you go through and as you start to build out your molecular slip box, your thinking box, you might find that one type of system works better than another. If that's the case, go with it. The whole point here is that we're trying to experiment for a way that works best for you. You want to follow your own intuition and then recalibrate your system as you identify those key moments of intuition. And finally, we don't want to have any orphan notes. And basically, what that means is that if we're dropping something into our molecular slip box, into our idea generator box, we don't want to just add an orphan note, a note that has no connection to any other note. The only notes that should go into the molecule box, into the idea generator box, is a note that we've already made a connection to another note. That way, we can begin to generate note sequences and we can link those concepts together, connect the dots between our thoughts over time, and that's where we really start to get this nonlinear value, this emergent property coming into existence. So now it's time to get into templates. Okay, I think that's enough theory for the moment. I realize that this has been a lot of information. Before we get into the templating and the practical element of building my molecular Zettelkasten system, including source templates, fleeting note templates, literature note templates, and permanent note templates, along with how I use all of those different note types to build out my publishable notes, my alloys, I think it's worth taking some time for you to go through and think of your own goals, of what you're trying to do with the system. The better an idea you have of these goals, the easier and more practical this type of system will be, and the more helpful my templated system will be because you'll understand how to modify it to meet your own needs. So stay tuned for part 2 of this video where I get into the templating and the actual practical implementation of a Zettelkasten system in Obsidian, which I'm calling Molecular Zettelkasten. If you found this video valuable, I would love if you would please consider subscribing. The more people that subscribe, the more I build up my YouTube, the more time I can spend making videos like this, so I really appreciate any support. You might also find it valuable to share with a friend. I found that talking about this system with a few other people has been the most beneficial for me, as it starts to make it seem a lot more tangible and real. Word of mouth is by far the best way to help me grow, so again, I really appreciate your support. If you're confused at all with the system, please feel free to leave a comment below and I'll go through and answer them. I think the more we talk about this, the easier it starts to help many other people understand personal knowledge management and hopefully reduce information overload, which can then boost the mental health of everyone in society. If you're interested, I will be taking my template system that I talk about in the next video, and I'll be packaging it as a zip file as a Vault starter kit for molecular Zettelkasten, and I'll be making that available on the cheapest tier of my YouTube membership, which is $2.99 Canadian or $2 US. So if you found this valuable and would like to support me so that I can continue to make more videos, please consider joining my membership. Finally, if you're interested in learning more about what Obsidian is and how it can be structured in different ways, and how you can use Obsidian to form part of a digital garden to help you share your knowledge and to cultivate it over time, along with artificial intelligence that can boost this entire system, I have a playlist here that goes in depth on Obsidian, digital gardening, personal knowledge management, and augmenting it all with AI. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.